Welcome to On the Go with AAUW, the American Association of University Women. I'm your host, Jennifer DeSanto, the Executive Director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at George Mason University. And today we will be discussing medical marijuana in the state of Virginia with Virginia State Senator Dave Marsden and the Executive Director of Virginia NORML, Jen Michelle Pedini. Welcome, Jen Michelle. Welcome, Dave. Thank you so much for being here on the program with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Medical marijuana is a hot topic across the country, really. And in Virginia, it's we're getting into some fairly new legislation, which I'd like to delve into a lot. But what I'd like to do on this program at first is just kind of get to know my guests and let the audience get to know you. Jen Michelle, you're the Executive Director of the Virginia affiliate of NORML. Tell us what NORML is.
Well, NORML is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. NORML was founded in 1970 by a public interest attorney, Keith Stroup, who actually lives here in Virginia. Virginia NORML is the state affiliate, and I am the Executive Director of Virginia NORML and the Development Director for NORML.
Okay, very good. And Senator Marsden, why don't you tell us a little bit about your service to the state of Virginia?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I started out after college as a probation officer, a group home director, juvenile detention superintendent, and then finished my career in juvenile justice in 2002 as the acting director of the Virginia Department of Juvenile Justice in Richmond, and then ran for office in the House of Delegates in 2005 and was elected to the Senate in 2010. And been there ever since.
Very good, and we're glad that you're there.
Well, thank you. I'm glad somebody is.
We're here to talk about medical marijuana and some legislation that's been put through in the state of Virginia. But what is medical marijuana? What constitutes medical marijuana?
Well, medical marijuana is best described as the cannabis plant that's been regulated for medical use, and it can take a variety of forms. In Virginia, the products that will be available here, at least initially, are extraction-based, meaning the plants will be grown and the essential oils extracted. And then those oils can be put into a variety of formulations. Right now, patients can expect to get anything they would typically find at a compounding pharmacy: a gel, a cream, a spray, a lozenge, a lollipop, products like that.
And what are the components of the oil? I mean, the concern, I think, for the public is you don't want people getting high necessarily off these products. However, we don't necessarily have those concerns about other kind of prescription medications that are out there. So there's a lot of stereotypes and myths that are surrounding this notion of kind of legalizing marijuana in any form. But what are the specific oils that you're talking about in some of these medicinal products?
So in Virginia's program, our products have to contain a minimum amount of one of two cannabinoids. And cannabinoids are organic compounds that are found in the cannabis plant. We require that our products have a minimum of 5 milligrams of either CBD, and that stands for cannabidiol. It's a medically popular cannabinoid, and it does not have any intoxicating effects, but it does have some therapeutic benefits. And the product could either contain the 5 milligrams of CBD or 5 milligrams of THCA, and that stands for tetrahydrocannabinolic acid. That is how THC is found naturally in the plant in its acid form. And while in its acid form is THCA, it's also not intoxicating, but does have some limited medical potential as well. Once the THCA is heated up, it turns into THCA. That has a number of therapeutic applications and can also be intoxicating in some amounts to some people.
But many people need this type of treatment. I know that the legislation was really catalyzed by a specific kind of human story around the needs of a child with epilepsy. And Dave, you were involved in this.
I was. About 5 years ago, I received a letter from a young lady in Colorado. She was, I think, in the 8th grade. And she and her mom were living there as sort of refugees to be able to get, at that time they went out there to get what was known as Charlotte's Web, which was a hybridized version of the marijuana plant that had a heavy concentration of the CBD, cannabidiol oil, and a minimum amount of THC. and it relieved intractable epilepsy, the symptoms of intractable epilepsy.
Well,
And,
actually, why don't you tell us what intractable epilepsy is? It's a pretty severe condition.
It is, and there are a number of different kinds of epilepsy diagnoses that young people can get. And the cannabidiol in the marijuana plant seems to work very well within what's called intractable epilepsy, which is something contracted by children when they're usually very young.
And they can have seizures multiple times
Multiple.
during the day.
The young lady, I got a letter from Jen Collins about 5 years ago. Like I say, she was 8th, 9th grade, and asking me to do something. They'd written every legislator in Virginia, and we all get a number of these kinds of letters, but in this one I was particularly moved and made contact with the family and made plans to see if we could do in Virginia so that she could return home. It was tearing the family apart. The mom is out there with one sister, dad's home with the other. It's tough. And we wanted Jen to have a normal life, and so she came back and we went to work. Mm-hmm. And the first bill that we introduced was to make it legal to possess these kinds of products in the Commonwealth. Now, not so easy because it's federally against the law. And so what we created for CBD, if you had a physician's recommendation, not a prescription, you can't have a prescription, that would violate the federal law, but a recommendation that you have the condition, ultimately what the legislation did was allow you to have a relationship with an authorized grower, processor, distributor in Virginia, of which we ultimately authorized 5 to exist, 1 in each health department region of the state. And so that if you had this drug, you had an affirmative defense. In other words, it's like if you remember Monopoly, it's kind of a get out of jail free card. Mm-hmm. And if you had this recommendation, and both the parent and the child could exercise that affirmative defense. And that was the first step while we started the process of putting together regulations as to how the business was going to be run in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
So this particular family, the young lady in question, she was using medication for her epilepsy that's prescribable, but it just wasn't doing the trick, and it had a lot of horrid side effects that were really, really influencing her life. And so they had to go to Colorado from Virginia to get the legalized medicinal marijuana oils.
Yeah, the FDA drugs were creating all kinds of psychiatric and physical issues for Jennifer, and not only did the CBD oil work, it just didn't have the side effects that these FDA-approved drugs did.
Yeah, as you said, the family was being disrupted incredibly by this, and you were answering the call, and the legislature really came through. But that was just the first part of the story. And when did you get involved in this conversation?
Well, I was certainly there for the conversations. It was as we got a little further along in the process where we started looking at how we could serve the rest of Virginians. Initially, our state legislature agreed to provide this affirmative defense only to patients with intractable epilepsy. And that left a lot of other Virginians, out in the dark. Mm-hmm. So we came back, and with the assistance of Senator Marsden and Senator Donovan, we're able to greatly expand that. And now we have a let doctors decide model here, where physicians can simply make recommendations regardless of conditions. We've seen around the country a lot of states adopt these arbitrary lists of conditions that would qualify an individual. And Virginia's model is much preferable to that, where doctors are not limited by arbitrary conditions. They can simply practice medicine.
So no matter what the illness necessarily is, you now have, as long as you have not a prescription, but some kind of written affirmation from the physician or the physician's assistant or the nurse practitioner, that you can use if you were then sort of criminally taken into court to say that you shouldn't have these products.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is that the usual model in medicine is that the physician is the expert, and I think that will come along. But right now, what's going to happen, your relationship is really going to be with your pharmacist at one of these 5 facilities, who will be recommending to you different combinations of cannabidiol and THCA oil that you might use. And just to let people know who are listening to the show, these things don't really cure anything. Jennifer Collins went from sometimes up to 2,000 seizures a day down to a manageable 50, which allowed her to go back to high school, have a life, go out on dates, go to slumber parties, do all the things that she couldn't do before. But it didn't cure her. My young friend Tommy, who's now 26, Tommy Elder, Tommy spent months and months sometimes, in different years in ICU multiple times a year, and now it's down to every year and a half, 2 years. Does he still go into ICU? Sometimes, yes. He just had a recent episode, but he also just said his first word. Can you imagine?
Wow.
The mom of a 26-year-old, and she said, "Come on, Tommy, let's get in the car." And he looked at her and he went, "Car?"
Yeah.
Melt your heart. But it truly helps people, can help with any number of conditions. Jen Michelle knows better than I do. Multiple sclerosis, Crohn's, cancer, certain kinds of joint and degenerative autoimmune diseases it can provide relief for. And especially as we have an aging population, myself included, these are things we'll be looking for to have a better quality of life without the dangers of FDA-approved drugs and the awful side effects you hear about on television constantly about all the bad things that can happen. And
right.
Jen, what do you think? We have side effects for CBD pretty minimal?
Pretty minimal, and Senator Marsden, seniors are the fastest growing segment of medical cannabis and regulated adult use cannabis consumers.
There you go.
And the side effects are minimal. Whereas prescribed medications, opiates, they have severe side effects and addictive qualities. That's not necessarily true of some of these oils, these refined oils.
Sure. Yeah, marijuana does not have the ability to create a physical dependence in people. There certainly could be behavioral or psychological addictions, just like one could have to a number of other substances or objects, but it lacks that physical addiction component. And
you can't overdose necessarily on marijuana, which is a huge advantage for someone who needs pain medicine. Yeah.
What I think we have to think about, Jennifer, is the idea that this is a plant and it has liquids in it that these cannabinoids are part of that, and it's a question of separating out the things that we can truly help people, and discard those things that society is still making its mind up about as to whether we should have them, which is the intoxicating things. Some states now have recreational marijuana. I think there's how many now?
There are 10 states in the District of Columbia.
10 states in the District of Columbia have made that decision. Virginia went with the model we did, which is what's called the vertically integrated model. You grow it, you process it, and you sell it all from the same facility. You distribute it, and we're allowing for delivery. This is a very easy model for a conservative state to control, as opposed to the other model that may have 8 or 10 growers licensed by the state, 20-some processors, and hundreds of distribution points. What this is hopefully going to do is control some costs and allow the state to have a minimal amount of expense in regulating it. But you will know when you get something from one of these 5 facilities that the state is going to inspect it and analyze it, and it's going to be inspected not when it's made, but when it goes out the door, so that you know what you're getting is an effective product, because there's so much junk being sold in stores all over America that says it's CBD oil from the hemp plant, and in reality it's got heavy metals in it, microbes in it, minimal amounts of CBD, if any at all, because folks don't know what they're doing and there's no regulations as to the processing of those products. And Virginia just today, our Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, issued a letter that says, wait a minute, you can't sell those products anymore in Virginia until we have a regulatory scheme in place for the processing of them, to make sure that people are getting products that are safe and effective, and they're not just being made up. You don't want
snake oil salesman. You want to have the real deal.
You want to have the real thing, and we have that with the stuff, with the product from the marijuana plant. We don't have that from products coming from hemp.
Tell me about where these dispensaries are, how the manufacturing process is done, and how people can get these oils in Virginia.
Yeah, as the Senator mentioned, we have licensed 5 producers initially in the state, and they are located in Manassas, Stanton, Richmond, Bristol, and Portsmouth. At each of these facilities, the plants are grown indoors. The flowers are harvested, the essential oils are extracted. And then those oils can be put into really any variety of formulations as long as they meet the required cannabinoid contents as outlined in our regulatory process.
And these, you have to go to these dispensaries physically to get this stuff?
Yes, you will have to visit the facility in person initially. You're able to receive up to a 90-day supply at once, and then your refills are available by in-person delivery. So it won't be left on your doorstep, but the processors are able to come to you and deliver it to you in person, as well as some new legislation this year that will allow patients to identify a registered agent. So those people who may be in assisted living facilities or hospice or physically unable to go to the processors will be able to appoint someone to do so for them.
Very good. What is the next, what's on the horizon for the legislation in Virginia? And then I know that there's some work being done on the federal level. You want to talk about Virginia first,
Well,
and then Jen,
in
Michelle?
Virginia, right now, we have 5 processors, and that was probably too many when we just had intractable epilepsy as the only disorder that you could qualify for use of the CBD oil from. Now that it's been opened up to a broad range of disorders, and we have nurse practitioners and physician's assistants able to make recommendations for it. 5 might be too small. So one of the things we'll probably be seeing next year is companies coming in and asking for an increase in the number of licenses. And I don't know what that would be, but there were 52 companies that put in bids to ultimately that were awarded to 5 companies. And some of them were startups in Virginia, and others were very experienced companies who have done similar work in other states. So and they've formed an association, and I was just on the phone today with their executive director of their association, and we've created several hundred jobs here in the Commonwealth, especially, and a lot of them are in places where employment is not easy to come by. So that's a good thing too.
Yeah, that's great for Virginia. I want to bring some new economic resource to the community. So on the federal level, why don't we talk about what are the obstacles? Why is this a problem? If we know that this medicinal oils, if we know that there aren't that bad side effects, if we know it helps people with pain, it's a great alternative to addictive drugs that are on the market. What is holding us back from making this a federal, making this legal in our country? Is it the stereotypes and the myths? Is that what's holding us back? The kind of conversation, the culture of our country, or is it big pharma? Is it just bureaucracy? What are the obstacles, and what do you hope to see happen in what kind of timeline?
So marijuana is considered under federal law to be a dangerous Schedule I narcotic with no medical use and a high potential for abuse. Clearly, this does not comport with the belief of the majority of Americans or Virginians or laws throughout the country. It is really dependent upon Congress to take action. We have over 36 U.S. states and territories currently regulating marijuana, and that is in direct conflict with federal law that prohibits marijuana from crossing
because it's
state
criminal.
lines.
It's criminal.
It's right. It's criminal. It's criminal. It's federally illegal. So Congress really does need to take action to end the federal prohibition of marijuana, remove it from the Controlled Substances Act, and simply allow states to set their own policies free from federal interference, just as Virginia and the majority of other states have done.
Yeah. Jennifer, the way the federal government does it now, which is subject to change, is that basically Congress says in the Appropriations Act every year that no federal dollars can be spent to prosecute marijuana possession under a lawful state medical marijuana or recreational marijuana protocol. In other words, if whatever's legal in a state, the feds will not prosecute that. Anything illegal going on in the states, they're wide open to do that. But the Drug Enforcement Administration and other federal law enforcement agencies don't have the legal authority to spend any money, which means anybody's time or effort, to
So
enforce federal
even though
law.
even though it's federally illegal,
Even though it's still federally illegal.
Within the confines of the laws that you've established here in Virginia, individuals can utilize these dispensaries and use them for the oils for medicinal purposes. However, they can, if they're those dispensaries don't open until the fall, and there are a number of people who need these products, and they're illegally bringing them across state lines from perhaps other states that find it legal.
Yes.
So it puts the patient in a very precarious situation. What kind of stories have you heard about that? I mean, you must have a million stories like that. What are the consequences of a family with a child like Jennifer who don't move to Colorado and, you know, let's say prior to this new, I mean, up until fall, they'll still be able to prosecute someone who's bringing these oils over?
Under this law, they're still able to prosecute people. This is simply provides an affirmative defense. It's still illegal in Virginia, and it's still illegal at the federal level. Now, the Department of Justice isn't going to interfere at the state level as long as you're compliant with the state legal medical program. But that does not alleviate the potential for law enforcement interaction at the state level. We're certainly seeing that now, and we can still see that once these facilities open. And then people may have to assert that affirmative defense, present that certificate 10 days prior to trial.
But in the meantime, could they have their children taken away?
Absolutely, and all of those things can still happen, and are happening now under the existing affirmative defense model. And once the facilities are open, will still continue to happen. You can certainly have a lot of bad things happen to a family prior to going before a judge who could ultimately dismiss the case. As you mentioned, having children removed from the home, being evicted from a rental property that has a
tarnished on your record.
They can lose they can lose their student aid.
Yeah, but it is going to be less and less likely that those things will happen once sheriffs, Virginia is still, many of our counties they don't have police departments, they have locally elected sheriffs, so it becomes kind of a political thing. But after a while, you look pretty silly, trying to prosecute these things. But remember this, is that, if you think, well, I'll just go to Colorado, pick up a bunch and bring it to Virginia, every state line you cross, you're violating a federal law, and if you have it in your possession in a state where it's not legal, then you could get in trouble in that state. So getting it here puts you in legal peril. Even going across the Potomac River and acquiring something from a friend in Washington, D.C. and driving it back across the river, is illegal. And so is more than, I think, 3 gallons of liquor if you buy it in D.C. and bring it across the line, that you're violating a law and can get arrested. They used to stake out liquor stores. So, we need to end the silliness and get the country all on the same page, and only Congress and the President of the United States can do that by coming up with a sensible set of laws and regulations to deal with this that are consistent across state lines, and so that we can move forward and get the good from these plants that can help people relieve their pain and suffering, while at the same time avoiding the negative aspects of drug use.
And we have a lot of examples in states across the country. I think you said there were 12 different states across the country that have legalized either recreational or medicinal marijuana use. And used to wonder what would happen if you did that. Now you have a lot of good examples of what are the lessons learned that are coming out of these states. Are the myths being dispelled? Are you seeing more violence? Are you seeing more accidents? Are you seeing less? I mean, what's happening?
Yeah, we are seeing a decrease in violence, and we are seeing a decrease in DUI-related traffic incidents. What's really phenomenal is that we're seeing a decrease in opioid overdose fatalities. On average, states that have medical marijuana laws, not even access, but just laws, see a 25% reduction in opioid overdose fatalities in the first year. And by year 3 to 5, you're looking at a 35% reduction in those fatalities. You're seeing reduced opioid use and reduced prescription drug use in general. These states are also experiencing significant Medicaid and Medicare savings as well. And what about the children is such an important question. right? So as you mentioned, we don't have to guess anymore what happens when we regulate marijuana. We have over 36 U.S. states and territories regulating marijuana. There is an abundance of data for legislatures and for regulators to review and choose the the best path forward for their state or for their municipality. These best practices are out there and they're available for all of us to look at. And some of the best data that we can get our hands on are those that say, listen, when you take marijuana off the street corner and you put it behind an age-verified counter where it can be safely regulated for either medical or adult access, that is when you reduce youth use and when you reduce youth access. And that's really important.
Yeah.
I think the jury is still out a little bit on some of the impaired driving that comes with the use of marijuana. Certainly alcohol is a huge problem in drunk driving. And I don't know that there's some indications, there certainly hasn't been a huge spike in it, but I think that we just don't really know yet how much of that is a problem. But it's like anything, as it becomes normalized and becomes no big deal, fewer and fewer people are going to use it. And
right,
that's generally
that desire to do something bad.
Yeah, to be something, to be
away.
cool and dangerous and risky with your friends. Look what I've got. Look what I'm doing. Things like that. Once we do that, it becomes easier to control and easier to spot. And we're developing technology that can detect the use of cannabis by drivers and whether it's impairing them or not. So technology is our friend in that regard. But we have certainly not unleashed the hounds from hell when we went with medical marijuana in this country. But it's a learning experience. And each state is its own little living laboratory of things that we learn from or we study from. And Virginia, being a southern state, we took the most conservative approach imaginable by just going with the vertically integrated model and just the CBD oils. As to whether that's going to be expanded, that's probably up to the next generation of legislators, but we're going to see how this goes. And we certainly know that we're going to be helping a lot of people, children with epilepsy, people with any kind of disorders, and then just old folks like me with aches and pains and things that this can relieve without the side effects. And that's the big deal here. Is that this stuff is largely harmless and won't create problems for you. And that's what I think everybody's looking for in their medicine these days.
Well, thank you so much for being on the program with me today. And we've learned a lot about what Virginia is doing. And we're excited to follow this in the legislature. Thank you so much, Jen Michelle and Senator Marsden.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for watching On the Go with AAUW.